Let me put my disclaimers in right now. Because I am a Jesuit and a priest in the Roman Catholic tradition, my angle of perception and my point of view proceed naturally and organically from that tradition. At least I hope they do. Later, I'll make some references to Jesus and his significance for what I'm talking about this afternoon. Still, what I have to say about the subject of desire in the human person is accessible to anyone. One need not be a person of religious faith or even a theist. I hope to do two things in this talk. I'd like to expose you to a particular theory about human desire, a very challenging theory, what the theologian James Allison calls both a very simple and a very difficult idea. Second, I'd like to suggest that what is needed if we are to grow in our understanding of our own human desire is a spiritual approach to our interior lives, one that is entirely dependent on what is usually called grace. That is, we need to be open to receiving insight as a gift in order to move towards some sort of conversion at the level of desire. So let's start with a poem by Galway Kinnell. He titles this Prayer. Whatever happens, whatever what is what I want. Only that, but that. Once more, whatever happens, whatever what is what I want. Only that, but that. In this short but sharp-edged poem, the narrator expresses a clear wanting, a clear desire for only what is, which means a desire only for what is real, what is actual, which is another way of saying that her desire is real, directed as it is toward only what actually is. Further, while the narrator will settle for only that, she will also settle for nothing less than that. The real is what she wants. The French philosopher René Girard has discovered, especially in works of literature like Shakespeare and Dostoevsky, a particular understanding of human desire. He is very clear that he did not invent this theory. He discovered it already present in many, many other works, including Scripture. He calls this theory mimetic theory, after the Greek word meaning to imitate, to follow after, to strive, to resemble. My exposure to Girard's ideas come to me secondhand through the theologian James Allison. He puts it this way: mimetic theory is a genetic understanding of human relations that takes into account both the constitution of the person and social structure. So, mimetic desire is one which is modeled on the desire of another. Think about how babies learn everything: gestures, facial expressions, language. They mimic their caregivers, don't they? In fact, nearly all of learning begins with the imitation of someone else, a model who has already mastered what we are trying to learn. We even have a saying: imitation is the highest form of flattery. So if all our initial learning about how to draw or do math problems or use languages, how to learn engineering or law or music or teaching or anything else, if it all comes from mimesis, the imitating of others, why not desire itself? Is our individual experience of desire actually unique to and autonomous in each one of us? Or does our desire develop by imitating the desire of another? We can easily accept this notion about learning most things by imitating the knowledge, skill, and expertise of others. But by the time we're adults, we tend to believe that our desires for a particular place to live, a particular occupation, an interest in specific activities or books, our preferences for certain colors or foods, or even the person with whom we decide to spend the rest of our lives. Surely these matters are decided completely by our own individual and unique freedom of choice. Surely these are free acts of our own wills. To use the expression from Cannell's poem, we believe that this is what is, that our autonomous will is real, not modeled on anyone else's will. In our culture, in every area of our individual lives, we prize the unique value and exercise of our personal freedom. So let's ignore the fact that the person we married may be exactly like our mother or father, or exactly the opposite. Let's ignore the classic but clumsy snob appeal of Patrick Stewart in those national car rental ads. I deserve this. Yes, you do, business pro. Yes, you do. In fact, let's ignore all advertising. We always see right through it anyway, don't we? We never buy any goods or services we don't really want or need, do we? After all, we're free to make any choice we really want to. That's how we think about desire. It is the expression of our free choices. Gerard and Allison would say, not so. They claim that we have simply forgotten that our desire is imitative, just as we have forgotten the other imitative learning experiences that formed us in the first 1 or 2 years of our lives. Allison says that the human will, and thus freedom, is shown to be a highly ambiguous construct, utterly shot through with the other, meaning another person, which is anterior to the formation of our will. Now this is the hard part, okay? I'm going to have to ask you to work hard. There are two kinds of mimetic desire. The first is fairly benign, the mimesis of simple imitation of an admired and respected model or mentor. In such cases, our having forgotten that our desire is modeled on someone else's is not really a problem. But there is another form of mimetic desire that afflicts both individuals and social groups. Not simply imitation of the desire of another, it is in rivalry with the desire of another. It is desire set over and against that of another. And this is where Allison's very simple idea becomes very difficult. Not just difficult to grasp, but difficult to accept for the personal and cultural reasons already mentioned. If such a rival desire were conscious, we would call it simple competition. But because we are generally unaware that our desire can be formed over against another, instead of simply having forgotten, we enter into a kind of denial about our desire. And this denial leads us into a kind of hypocrisy, in the Greek sense of that word, a mask. Only we don't know we're wearing the mask, and so we don't realize just how violent our hypocrisy can become, and how that violence can take the form of hatred for the other, a hatred which is always righteous, and which leads to what Thomas Merton called our rightness depending on the wrongness of the other. Mimetic rivalry leads to some kind of violence, and in religious groups, it leads to sacred violence. Now, just in case all this theory sounds too abstract and irrelevant, let me offer some quick examples of what the violence of mimetic rivalry can look like in a person. When the doors of a business open for the annual Black Friday sale after Thanksgiving, spraying mace in the faces of other shoppers in order to get first to what I want. A second example would be having an episode of road rage, whether it leads to legal and financial problems or not. But it is in the case of social groups that the real malaise of mimetic rivalry shows itself. Perhaps you saw the news footage from northern Burma, Myanmar, footage of Buddhist monks urging on other Buddhists to set fire to the homes and businesses of their Muslim neighbors. Then, when their neighbors ran out of the burning buildings, the Buddhists were urged, again by monks, to kill them. Or the negative, sometimes violent reactions to Muslims generally in our own country in the wake of 9/11, and now after the Boston Marathon bombings. For a third, more generic example, allow me a short digression. The poet Robert Bly was deeply influenced by the Jungians, whose psychology makes important use of archetypes, archetypes being constellations of energy in each one of us, like warrior, king, magician, lover, etc. Bly once observed that warrior energy is very important to every one of us. It's the energy that helps us push through and get things done. But warrior energy is a danger to the community when it is not in the service of some king, that is, some good greater than itself. And then he made the trenchant observation that a gang is warrior energy in the service of no king. Or in Allison's Girardian terms, it is the violence of mimetic rivalry at work. A final social example, very close to home for me as a Catholic priest, is the spectacle of some Catholic bishops, at least some of whom are closeted gay men, publicly attacking homosexuals as the root and source of sexual abuse among the clergy, while at the same time having the greatest difficulty addressing the question of their own culpability for what happened. Now, in all of these examples, we have one group maintaining its cohesion and unity by demonizing another group and elaborating a rationale for their destruction, or at least their expulsion from the group. The destruction or expulsion of the victim preserves the unity of the group. Again, in religious circumstances, this takes the form of sacred violence. What then are we to do? Let's leave aside any questions about the divine origins of Christianity and listen to Allison's statement. The beginning of Christian moral life is a stumbling into an awareness of our own complicity in hypocrisy and becoming aware of quite how violent that hypocrisy is. This can only happen by grace, a gift over time that brings us into the process of having our desire, our heart, our way of being with each other completely reformed through a lifelong therapy for our distorted desire. So let me end with two short passages from the great mystical poet Rumi. We began as a mineral, we emerged into plant life and into the animal state, then into being human, and always we have forgotten our former states, except in early spring, when we almost remember being green again. Humankind is being led along an evolving course through this migration of intelligences, and though we seem to be sleeping, there is an inner wakefulness that directs the dream. it will eventually startle us back to the truth of who we really are. Christian religion always talks about God loving us, but never about the fact that God likes us, that Jesus likes us. Finally, Rumi says this, and I leave you with this consoling thought. If you want what the world is, you are an employee. If you want the unseen world, you are not living with your truth. Both wishes are foolish. But you will be forgiven for forgetting that what you really want is love's confusing joy. Thank you.